It's the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. For more on the Seminoles, including Osceola's coverage from veteran Seminole insiders, message boards, Osceola virtual happy hours, and more, go to theosceola.com.
Hello and welcome to the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines Podcast, which is presented by our sponsor, Alumni Hall, where you will find officially licensed FSU gear for the entire family. Please visit Alumni Hall at alumnihall.com or visit our Tallahassee store at 1817 Thomasville Road. My name is Pat Burnham. I'm a football writer for the Osceola and host of Seminole Sidelines. I'm joined today by Osceola managing editor Bob Ferrante and by former FSU offensive lineman and voice of the FSU baseball team, Eric Luallen. Guys, before we get started, I want to remind our Osceola subscribers that you can log on to the Osceola and click on the Alumni Hall ad to receive a 20% discount code for online purchases and get your membership card to present at the store for in-store purchases. All right, guys, we really should call this Seminole Baselines instead of Seminole Sidelines because our guest, Eric Luallen, who was a former football player, as I said earlier, is also the voice of the Seminoles, and he's covering, obviously, the hottest team in college baseball right now. Florida State baseball got off to a 2-4 start and has won 9 of its last 11, and including victories over Florida, 3 over Miami, and last night's win over UCF. The only team in the state to beat Florida State is University of North Florida. So, Eric, tell us a little bit about your general observations on the 2-4 start and what has transpired over the last several weeks. This has gone from a team who could not bat its way out of a wet paper bag who are now blowing out a 6th-ranked team like Miami by a combined score of, I believe, 36-2, something like that.
Yeah, it's been something to watch. You go back to the early part of the season, and obviously strikeouts were a big issue. This team was striking out at an alarming rate, and I know we've kind of moved into an age of baseball where it's almost become, I guess, passé to say, hey, strikeouts are no big deal. Every out is the same thing. An out is an out, whether it's a fly ball, a ground ball, a strikeout. But Mike Martin Jr. brought up a good point a few weeks back when talking about the strikeouts, and he said, hey, look, this isn't the major leagues. Every team doesn't field 985. So you've got to put the ball in play. You've got to put pressure on the other team to make plays because, we played a Miami ball club over the weekend that fielded 965, and you saw that at times. You saw them struggle out in the field. I think they had 3 errors in the first game. They had 4 errors in the second game. They had a big error in the Sunday game as well. And you look at Florida State last night, 10th inning, UCF's got first and third, and a team that has played very good defense for the last 5 or 6 games. They blew a double play opportunity there, threw a ball in the dirt, and UCF ends up scoring a run to take the lead there in the 10th inning. So, that kind of drives home that point that Meat was trying to make is that, this in college baseball, there's a much higher premium on putting the ball in play than maybe at the major league level. So you can't sit there and just kind of wave off strikeouts and say they're not a big deal because so much can happen just by putting the ball in play. So I think that was a big issue. And I think it's another good point that Meat made about this team is the game itself is such a mental game. There are so many things to it. It's a mental game for the pitcher. A pitcher can get into a rut where he can do everything right mechanically, but there's a mental space that he can't get himself out of, and that can keep him from having success. Same thing goes for a guy at the plate. Same thing goes for a guy out in the field. And I think Meat brought up the point that you've got a lot of these guys didn't play summer ball like they would have normally. So they stopped playing in March. They didn't play over the summer like they normally would. They got back to fall practice. And I'm speaking specifically about the hitters here. They got back to fall practice and they had to face our pitchers. And then they got done with fall practice. They got into spring practice and they had to face our pitchers again. And we can really pitch. I think that so far is clear. No matter what else has happened, that we can really pitch as a team. Right now, Florida State's leading the ACC in earned run average. Going into last weekend, I think we were third in strikeouts per 9 innings. So having to have all of that time where the only pitching you see is your own and they can really get the job done, that can be a mental block for these guys as hitters. And so I think there's something to be said for maybe that having a little bit of an impact on this team early on in the season. And they seem to have emerged from that now. Strikeouts are way down, run production is way up. And certainly, throwing Parker Messick in there, throwing Wyatt Crowell in there, those have had good outcomes. Again, whether that's because of their production ability or because of just kind of a mental thing that has happened with that lineup, it's had a very good impact. Robby Martin is on a 9-game hitting streak now, I think, as of last night. Matt Nelson now has a 6-game hitting streak going. So everybody's kind of moving in unison at this point in time. And I think we're seeing what the results can get you when that happens with this team, which does say, okay, this team's got a lot of potential if this is what happens when all the parts are moving together. We've played good defense. We've gotten the job done offensively. And, again, we can really pitch. So I think when all of those parts are moving, this has the makings of a very good baseball team.
Now, what were your thoughts coming out of those first 2 series, particularly coming out of the Pitt, being swept by Pitt, who was, I believe, picked to be last in the ACC in one of the preseason polls? What do you think about what was your thoughts on the potential of that, or is it too early to make an assessment? Or what were your general thoughts coming out of that Pitt series?
That was a tough one because I think it was pretty easy to see watching them play in person that Pitt was a much, much better ball club than I think anybody had expected. And, going back to some of the preseason stuff and where they were picked, there were a lot of college baseball pundits who were basically saying, look, there are 14 teams in the ACC that are probably good enough for postseason play, but you're not going to get 14 into the postseason. So I think compared to everybody else, maybe Pitt was viewed as lower echelon, but I think there was also some acknowledgement there that they were very much improved and had the makings of a good ball club. And I think right now, they went on the road. They lost 2 out of 3 to Duke. That's the only series they've lost this year. And they're sitting at 8-4 in the conference right now. And they really haven't gotten into where they've played. They haven't played much baseball at home yet. So they've had to go around and they've gotten this done with most of their games being on the road to this point in the season. Their schedule is tough moving. Everybody's schedule in the ACC this year is tough. It's like I said, you've got teams that legitimately are good. I don't think anybody could have predicted that NC State would be, from a result standpoint, as bad as they've looked so far. And same with Clemson. Florida State was picked third in the Atlantic behind Louisville and NC State. NC State's now last in the Atlantic. But I say that meaning if those are 2 of the worst teams by record so far in the ACC, that tells you there are no easy weekends in the Atlantic Coast Conference this year. So I say Pitt's got a tough road coming up, but I think everybody in the conference has a tough road coming up as far as the conference play goes. So, that's a long way of saying I think Pitt is much better than I think we probably could have foreseen. And I don't say that to say that Florida State took them lightly. I just say that, you shouldn't get swept. And you look back at that series, they lost a game 1-0, and they lost a game in extra innings that we probably should have won. So that one very easily could have swung, lose 2 out of 3 or win 2 out of 3. So you can't excuse getting swept at home, but I do think that Pitt is a much better ball club than we would have imagined.
Well, the Bats really woke up that Sunday in Blacksburg when they scored 14 against the Hokies. But, the Florida game, you come home, Florida's one of the most highly ranked teams in the nation, or was early in the season. How much do you think that win meant to this particular ball club and what has happened since then in the last 4 ball games?
Well, I think it started going back to Friday in Blacksburg, I think is when we kind of saw this starting to come together. Logan Lacey gets the pinch hit 2-run homer that puts the Noles on top. They get the come from behind win. in the opener in Blacksburg. They came back on Saturday and they ran into a pitcher who, frankly, he's got 2 starts against Florida State now, and I think he's given up, I want to say it's 3 hits and no runs in 14 innings in 2 starts against FSU going back to 2019 and then this year. So I think it kind of started going on that Friday game in Blacksburg, and then, like you said, Sunday scoring 14 runs certainly helped things a lot from the mental side. But yeah, that Florida game was huge. And you also go back to, and I talked about this with Meade a little bit this past weekend in Miami. I think it was, and I don't remember the numbers exactly, but I think it was first 11 games. Florida State got outscored 13-6 in the first 2 innings. And then from that point on, whenever it was that Meade and I talked about it, we had outscored opponents 19-0 in the first 2 innings. And after that Saturday game in Blacksburg, he talked to the team and really stressed, hey, we need to get out here. We need to get out to a good start, jump out into the first lead, score the first runs. And statistically speaking, the team that scores first wins more often than they lose. But we had been a slow starting team, and he wanted them to really focus on trying to get out, grind it out, get out to that first lead. And like I said, when I brought that up to him, it was 13-6 the first 11 games, then like 19-0 after that. And we got off to that quick start against Florida, and it's so much easier. It's so much easier from a mental standpoint to play when you're playing with the lead than it is when you're playing from behind. When you're playing from behind, you're always, you always feel like you're trying to grind, trying to play catch up, trying to do things that put you out of your comfort zone. When you're playing from the front, when you're playing with the lead, I think you're able to just play the game and play more like yourselves. And I think that's been a big factor in this as well. Just what Florida State's been able to do early in ball games and to take those leads early on. But, they came out in the Florida game, they got the early lead, and you always felt like from that point on that Florida State was in control. You never felt like at any point in that game, Florida took back control of that game and things were really going their way. And that's just, I think, such a big thing. And from a confidence standpoint, taking that and then going into Miami, just the snowball rolling down the hill at that point.
Yeah, and there's a couple of kids I want to talk about. You mentioned one of them, Parker Messick. Doesn't even look like the same kid physically as he was last year, obviously. And I think Matheu Nelson's the same way, both having great years. What are your impressions of them to this point in the season? And, who needs to step their ball game up for FSU to continue doing what they're doing?
Well, Messick, he's got such a great personality. And I think that is, if you look at his personality on the mound, that's the kind of guy that they're trying to recruit. Not only do you want a guy with that kind of talent, you lefties that have plus stuff, 3 pitches that all of them rate out that way, who can throw strikes. Yes, that's great. Those are great characteristics to try to get in a baseball player. But it's the mental side of it. It's that bulldog. It's that toughness, that mean streak that Parker Messick has. And you can see it when he pitches. That's the kind of guy that they're really trying to recruit and trying to get into this program at Florida State. And I think they've done a good job of doing that here in just the couple of years that this staff has been together. So I think Messick's got a great mentality, but for him to be able to step in and do what he's done with the bat with very little time at the plate. He was a very good hitter in high school. So it's not like this is completely out of the blue, but then, I joked with him after the game on, I think it was Saturday. It was either Friday or Saturday's game. He slid kind of awkwardly into second base. And I almost lost my breath because the way he slid, his foot and his knee kind of got jammed up a little bit. And I'm like, because this is the Friday starter and everything else. And so I asked him in the hotel after the game, I said, did you get a bunch of grief from the dugout over that slide? Because baseball dugouts are merciless. Any kind of goofy kind of mistake is you never hear the end of it in a baseball dugout. And he said, yeah, he caught a lot of heat for that slide when he got back into the dugout. He said, but I haven't slid in 2 years. Because it's not, he came to Florida State. He pitched last year. He's one that did play summer ball, and he pitched in the Florida Collegiate League. And he was a pitcher up until 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. He was a pitcher. So it's not something pitchers don't go out and practice sliding. So he hadn't slid in a game, hadn't slid at all in 2 years. And he said, I went a lot farther than I was expecting to. So I think that mentality, though, he's got the talent with the bat, but I think that mentality for him is something that has allowed him to go and have success at the plate, even though he's kind of out of practice and hasn't done it a whole lot. So I think that's been a big help for the team. And again, mentally, to see him go out and play that way, I think is a lift to everybody else, because it makes everybody else try to step their game up too. And, all these guys are ultra competitive. If they weren't ultra competitive, they wouldn't be playing at Florida State. And so they see him, they're like, well, he can do that. I'm going to go out there and do that too. They all, it just builds on itself. So I think that's been a big key to this. Matt Nelson, it's been fun to watch him from his freshman year to now and kind of morph into the leader that he's become for this team. First of all, he's as good a kid as you'll find. I enjoy talking to him, the nicest guy in the world. But he is, he's kind of become that leader in the locker room, the clubhouse for this team. And you can see it with his performance that as this team needed to be lifted, that he was one of the guys that started to do that lifting. And, he missed the third game of the Virginia series, was back in the lineup for Virginia Tech, and he's been on a roll ever since. And you go back and you look, he doesn't have back-to-back games this year without a hit. So if he gets held hitless, you can almost guarantee it's not going to happen 2 times in a row. It hadn't this year. He's got 2 games all year where he doesn't have at least 1 hit. So to have a guy that isn't going to go through those prolonged droughts, I think is a big, big thing. But that leadership in the clubhouse, Meat talked about it before the game yesterday about the possibility of, okay, you've won 5 in a row. You had the 44-6, I think, was the total between the 1 Florida game and the 3 Miami games. Now you're playing UCF. They're 9-10. Can you look at the record and have a letdown, have a mental, all right, we can relax a little bit now. And he said, look, I like the leadership we've got in the clubhouse, and those guys won't let it happen. And he's talking about, he's talking about a Matt Nelson. He's talking about a Robby Martin. He's talking about a Reese Albert. He's talking about a Parker Messick. Those guys, the kind of the backbone of this team from that leadership standpoint.
Yeah, you mentioned going back to Nelson, second on the team in RBIs, first in slugging percentage, just having out, and he's doing I think 3rd or 4th in batting average. Guys that have played more than 6 games anyway, 322 appeared in more than 6 games, but certainly he's been a guy that's impressive to me. The other guy that Jerry and I were talking about last week on our podcast, we taped last week. Tyler Martin, man, when I first went out there last year and I saw that Meat was batting him first, I was like, and I'm a coach's kid. And I was like, oh, God, he's the coach's kid's batting first. This kid's already got enough pressure on him. And the kid just hits the ball. I mean, he's a natural. I don't know how any other way to describe it. I mean, he is a baseball player through and through. You see it in his mannerisms. You see it in his production. Were you surprised at the success Tyler's had?
I know, look, before I started doing radio and before Meat was an assistant coach, I mean, I've known the guy since he was a player at FSU. He's a little bit younger than I am, but, we had some spillover there from my time after school. We got to be friends, when he was a player at FSU. So I've known him for a long time. And he wouldn't I had to laugh a little bit at, he's only putting his kid in there because it's his kid. Here's a guy that took over the job and took over for a legend. He would not put his kid into that spot and put himself under that microscope if he didn't think that the needed elements were there for Tyler to go out there and have success. Because of what it means. It's not like he's a 25-year established head coach and, he's going to throw his son in there, but nobody's going to say anything because he's the 25-year established head coach. And he wouldn't do that. I remember him telling me the fall of 19, it was probably, I want to say it was around November. He said, he goes, I think I'm going to have to. And this was not a planned thing that Tyler was going to be an early entrant and graduate. He said, I think I'm going to need him to because I'm going to need him. And this was like November. He said, so I think he can graduate early and I think he's going to be out there in January. And I went out every time I went out and practice in January and early February, every single time Tyler was hitting the ball all over the yard. So when Meade announced that Tyler, it was a day or two before the first game, when he announced what the starting lineup was going to be and that Tyler was going to be the leadoff batter, I wasn't at all surprised because of what I had seen going to practice and talking to other people there, not just Meade, but talking to other people there, and all of them saying, man, he's just killing the ball. So no, I wasn't surprised I wasn't surprised after what I saw to see what he was able to accomplish during that short season last year. And having watched that, I'm not surprised by what's going on this year. He's again, it's that attitude that I talked about with Messick, and Tyler's kind of got the same thing. I can guarantee you, as a former pitcher, when he steps into the box as a pitcher, you do not want to see him just because he is going to battle you through every pitch of that at bat. And, the numbers say you're going to lose more than you're going to win that battle as the pitcher.
Yeah, he's batting 400, 22 hits and 55 at bats.
Base percentage was 562 going into the night last night, and he got 3 hits. So like I said, as a pitcher, you're losing that battle more than you're winning statistically.
Well, we've talked about the son. Let's talk about the father. We did not get a chance to see very much baseball in his unofficial first year last year in 2020. What are some of the things that you've seen in Mike Martin Jr. that might be a little bit different than how his dad handled his baseball teams? And what are some of the similarities you see between junior and senior?
I think from a similar standpoint, he's got a lot of experience working for his father, seeing how this program was run, seeing how this program could year in and year out have the kind of success that it had, in how they go about doing things, not just, how they go about coming out on the field. It's not just things like, how you go out on the field and play a game. It's little things. And this is something I had this conversation with a friend of mine who's a former college baseball player and not a Florida State guy. We were talking about it's something that I had never noticed and thought about. But, when you see a coach or a manager in baseball come out and replace the pitcher hands him the ball, pitcher leaves the mound, new pitcher comes in. Mike Martin, and I never thought about this until he and I had a conversation with it, probably in 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. And he said, I'll never take the ball from the pitcher. So if you watch, and Meat does the same thing. He learned that from his dad. So when the pitching change is made, the pitcher who's leaving the game waits for the next pitcher to come out from the bullpen, and he hands the ball to the guy coming in. And the coach is not, he said, look, he's coming out of the game. I'm not going to take the ball from him and make him walk away as we wait on the new guy. And it's just a mental thing that, to me is pretty significant. And I pointed that out to my buddy again, who played college baseball. He's like, wow, I never thought about that. And he was a pitcher too. And he kind of, in his mind, he's like, I kind of have an appreciation for that. So it's little things like that he's seen from his dad, that he's learned from his dad, that he has kept and incorporated into his own coaching style. And I do think that I think there's a more, and I'm trying to think of how to say this without having it sound like an insult to 11, because it's not at all meant as an insult to 11. But I think there's more of an incorporation of analytical things that have become a part of baseball, that have become big in baseball over the last 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 years, that Meat will incorporate in that weren't a part of 11's coaching philosophy, where there's much more of a, in this situation, this is what the numbers say that you should do, I think is taken into consideration more. That doesn't mean he's going to follow it, but I think that kind of thing is taken into consideration more than making a decision that's just kind of a feel. So I think there's more analytics going into decisions that Meat makes than maybe there would have been for 11. And again, I'm trying to figure out a way to say that without coming off as insulting to 11. It's just, that's the way the game was for a very long time. I just think that Meat incorporates kind of a little bit more of the modern on that. And there's a little bit more, I think, attention to detail paid on things, not conditioning or weight training, but kind of some of the ancillary that can go along with that. How you eat at all times, not just, all right, we're going to eat something healthy this meal. It's trying to be like that 24 hours a day and not just for that 30-minute time that you're eating the meal. So I think there's more of a wanting to pay attention to things like dietitians and nutrition and things like that, which is more of a new school, I guess, kind of approach than maybe what you would have seen 20 years ago out of this program. So I think he's done a good job of incorporating some newer philosophies in the game of baseball, some more modern philosophies in the game of baseball, with a lot of the things that his father did over the course of that 40 plus years to have the kind of success and consistent success that he had leading this program.
All right, we've talked some about go ahead, Bob.
Well, I'm just going to jump in and ask you something I've been thinking about with Hauser Stadium in general. We spend a lot of time there throughout the course of the year. The fans do too. It looks beautiful on the outside. It looks beautiful when you're sitting in your seat. There are some times when, you might see some rust and you want to, fix that, some paint, you want to clean it up a little bit. But you've been everywhere around the ACC and a lot of the SEC parks too. When you're in those parks around the country, do you see things at those parks and say, wow, could we bring a little bit of that to Tallahassee, to Hauser? Are there elements that could maybe make that fan experience at Hauser just a little bit better?
Oh, certainly. You always see those kind of things. From a building standpoint, I know Meat talked about it when we were in Blacksburg week before last, how he felt like whoever designed Virginia Tech's ballpark did a good job of incorporating things from different places and kind of meshing them all together to put things together and create that ballpark. It's a small, intimate setting there, but it's a nice, modern ballpark with some pretty cool amenities. And I think they did a really good job building that place. They spent $20 million, so you hope that you do a good job when you spend that kind of money. But I think they did a really good job with that ballpark. It will be interesting to see that program and what the experience is like in that ballpark if John Sheff can continue to have success. And once, all of these COVID restrictions are removed and that kind of thing, because there are some things that you can tell, they're not used to this. There's some things that they need to get a handle on to make, there's a line there to go from, wow, this is tremendous fan support to, okay, that you guys, you went past it. Not only did you step over it, you kind of went way past it. And there was a little bit of that And that's something that I think they'll probably get a handle on. But there were some things there that, talking to the coaching staff after, there were some things that went on with that they were like, hey, that was pretty impressive. That was pretty good. You see things at some of the other places, and some of the other places don't have the kind of support for baseball that you see in Tallahassee, that we saw in Blacksburg. They're not there yet, or baseball isn't that big of a deal yet. But schools have done a good job putting in place the mechanisms to help foster that. They just haven't gotten that support yet. And you see things that could be done to incorporate that and kind of improve the experience at Hauser. But top to bottom, I think from how the fans embrace the sport, how they come out and support the things that are there for the fans in order to show that support, all of those things are in place for a great experience at Florida State. And we always do have one. I know talking to the visiting radio guys, they always get fired up about coming, especially the first time they've ever been, because the visitors radio booth is the closest thing in the press box to Section B. So every time I talk to a visiting radio guy that's making his first trip to Tallahassee, he's excited because he's that close and he's heard all about him, and that he's close enough that I can hear him. But when you're 2 rooms further down from where I am, closer to him, you can really hear him. And that's 100% of the radio people that come to Tallahassee for the first time, they can't wait to hear that because they've heard all about it. So that's always cool to hear about. You hear those stories from people coming in. You hear those stories when we go other places, when they talk about the fans in Florida State and at Hauser. So that's always cool.
Hey, Eric, speaking of game day experiences, obviously not as many people, FSU fans, travel for baseball as maybe they do football or basketball. I've only seen FSU play out of town at Florida, and I did that as a student. What is the best game day experience outside of Dick Hauser in the ACC, in your opinion? If you were going to say, hey, you got to make this, if you're going to follow them for 3 games on the road, this is where you got to go.
That's a tough question.
We ask the questions that matter at the Osceola.
Yeah. I would say, golly, it's going to kind of, I'm probably going to throw a couple of things out there.
That's fine. Well,
if you go down to Miami for a series, you've got to go down there and have milkshakes. I mean, you absolutely have to have the milkshakes at Mark Light.
I saw you tweeting about that. I had no idea what you were talking about.
Yes, you absolutely 100% have to have the milkshakes at Mark Light. And that's, I have one every day that we're there. And I've been doing that for as long as I've been going down there. I was a little disappointed this year. They've scaled back the menu because of COVID. So they've taken about 2/3 of the menu off of the availability, but the Oreo was still there, and that was a strong choice. So, you've got to have the milkshakes at Mark Light. I think North Carolina, from a standpoint of the ballpark, the fans, the experience that you have at a game, I think is overall a very good experience. That's a good place to go watch a series. So UNC and Chapel Hill, I think that's kind of a must see.
I'm glad to hear that, because their football game day atmosphere is not very good.
Oh, I haven't been to a game I haven't been to a football game at Chapel Hill. I'm trying to think. Let's see who else. Clemson's a pretty rowdy place. And going back to what I said about Virginia Tech and kind of getting control of things and making sure that the fans understand expectations, I think Clemson is a place that's done that. I know if you ever talk to Coach Martin about it, to Levin about it, he has some not so fond memories from when we first started going there. But And I remember going and thinking, they're loud. They can get a little rowdy, but I never heard anything that seemed all that out of bounds. But I think from what I understand, that kind of stems from years back, his feelings for that place. But Clemson's a pretty good atmosphere. They've got the fans out beyond the outfield wall, beyond the left field wall. I can't remember the barbecue thing that they've got out there. But that's a pretty good atmosphere as well. So I would say probably from an atmosphere standpoint, probably Clemson, probably North Carolina would be two good ones.
Okay.
You got to go to Miami and have the milkshakes.
Well, I would be more prone to go into where the milkshakes are. I've been to South Carolina a couple times and to North Carolina a couple times. So I'd probably head to Miami. I got a milkshake the other day. Bill Zierzow, Will Zierzow's father, one of our former pitchers, he pointed out that the first time we met was in the shake line down in Coral Gables. And then it jogged my memory, and he said it was the 17-inning game. And I'm like, oh, God, I remember the 17-inning game. That's worth a couple of milkshakes.
Well, the problem with Coral Gables, from the standpoint of calling a game, there isn't a bathroom close enough for the 1 minute that I have in between innings. So that was 17 innings. And, between pregame and postgame and all of those things, I think it was like 7 hours that I had to kind of hold it. I remember the 17-inning game. I also remember meeting Bill Zierzow and his wife, but I remember the 17-inning game.
That's when you have to have a technical difficulty moment.
I did not have any of that game.
You just go dead for a couple of minutes. Hope you don't lose anybody. Hey, Eric, we're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsor, Alumni Hall. Will you come back and join us, talk a little bit more baseball? Then, of course, we'll get into some football and a little bit of March Madness. All right, we'll be right back in 30 seconds.
Alumni Hall, where you'll find officially licensed FSU gear for the entire family, including brands like Nike and Champion, plus great gifts for your favorite Seminole and home decor, too. Miss some of the old Seminole throwback logos? Check out our College Vault collection. Shop online at alumnihall.com and let our great customer sales team ship to you within days. Or pick up in store in Tallahassee. You'll find us in the Miracle Plaza Shopping Center on Thomasville Road. Students and military get 10% off in store, and Osceola subscribers get 20% off in store and online with their digital membership cards. Alumni Hall.
All right, we are back. I'm Pat Burnham, host of Seminole Sidelines, and we're here with Eric Luallen, the voice of the Seminole baseball team and managing editor of the Osceola, Bob Ferrante. Eric, I do want to continue a little bit on our baseball before we get into some football. Obviously, a lot of people, the generation of kids that are in college now probably know you more FSU fans for baseball, but you were a football player at Florida State and a highly regarded football player coming out of high school. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about that. But to finish up on the baseball side of things, we've talked about some of the known commodities for Florida State. Who are some guys that we need to pay attention to as this season moves along? One thing you just hope the team can get healthy. We've got Reese Albert got back in the lineup last night. We've got Logan Lacey. Hopefully will be back in the lineup this weekend. Ryan Romano is a kid that has gotten healthy and now has been in the lineup here going back to the Virginia Tech series. And I think you're starting to see some pretty good things out of him. So he's one to keep an eye on. I think right now you're kind of getting you're getting a pretty good feel for who the guys are going to be that we're going to get that production out of, that they're going to go to. I think we're at a point in the season where the lineup is, for the most part, other than some tweaks here and there, you're kind of seeing what it's going to be. And I think this year it's probably even more so than in years past, where there are a lot of guys that are maybe getting left out a little bit because of the roster size. You've got a 35-man roster. The roster is more than 40 this year because everybody got
an extra year of eligibility that was on the team last year. And then you only had a 10-round baseball draft. So a lot of guys that would have been drafted and would have left in a normal 40-round draft, that didn't happen. Or guys that maybe wouldn't have gotten drafted but would have signed free agent deals, seniors that were able to come back and play another year. So I think it's difficult to kind of point deeper than, 3 or 4 or 5 guys that we've seen so far this year on that bench to guys that are going to be huge contributors out there. And that doesn't mean that there aren't good players there. I just don't know. Unless you start having some struggles and trying some new guys again, I'm not sure how much more you'll see of other guys. Some guys I think that are going to be important contributors at some point this year. Garrett Mathis, we've seen a little bit this year. Casey Asman is another one that we've seen this year so far a little bit. AJ Shaver is a guy that we haven't really seen much of, but I know they're pretty high on. He's an outfielder freshman. Richie Morales is a kid that we haven't seen much this year, but he got in a couple of times down in Miami. I think he's another one that they've got really high hopes for. And then on the pitching staff, you only have so many innings. And when you've got a staff that's usually 15, 16, 17 guys, and you've got more than 20, it can be hard to get a lot of innings for people. But, Ross Dunn is a guy we haven't seen much of. He had a little bit of issue with control the first couple of times out. He threw a good, clean inning down in the Friday game, I believe it was, in Coral Gables. White Crowell, we haven't seen much on the mound, but they really have great expectations for him, another left-hander like Ross Dunn. Andrew Armstrong is another lefty that they really think highly of. These are all freshmen that maybe aren't getting the innings that you might normally see out of a freshman because of a veteran staff and a deeper than normal staff. Brandon Walker, again, another guy that we haven't seen a whole lot of, who I think can be a good piece to the puzzle for Florida State this year. So, I think there are some guys that will be good pieces, but I think the main sections of that puzzle, I think are pretty evident right now as far as who they're going to rely on for a lot of innings, for a lot of at-bats.
Yeah, they've been impressive the last several weeks, and whatever they're doing, they need to keep it going because they've got a 3-game series of Wake Forest this weekend. What can you tell us about the Demon Deacons baseball team?
Wake came in, they were ranked preseason, pretty high expectations for them. They've had some injury problems. They've had some COVID issues. They had to go on a 1.5-week pause due to positive tests within their program. And then when they came back out of it, they went down to Coral Gables and ended up having to cancel the 3rd game of their series with Miami because they just ran out of pitching due to, again, guys that were out because of COVID. So I don't think that they've played their best baseball yet. So certainly they're a team that coming in, you definitely can't take lightly because they can come in and do to you what Pittsburgh did if you're not on top of your game. So they do have the talent to come in and take a series from you. So I would expect a good series this weekend. I think there'll be a good test for Florida State.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to switch to a couple other sports. As you know, you've been on one of our Osceola happy hours before, so we've kind of talked about this kind of thing. This is a different listener base to our podcast. You came to Florida State as a football player. Kind of tell us about your path to Florida State, how you ended up at Florida State, and really, to ask a long question, how you ended up as the voice of FSU baseball. I played baseball and football in high school. I actually played basketball as a 9th grader, but had to kind of give up something to, those aren't 3 that really mesh well together from a seasonal standpoint, from a training standpoint, everything else. Baseball was probably my favorite sport, so that one wasn't going to go anywhere. And basketball was probably my least favorite, so that's the one that ended up going away. And probably the one that I was
that was probably third as far as me being any good at something out of those three. But yeah, my final my five visits that I took, I went to Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Virginia. Virginia was, it was weird because I had scheduled 4 and I wasn't sure who I wanted to take the 5th trip to. And there were, probably 3 or 4 schools I was thinking about. But I also, back then, most people they did their trips in January. We didn't have all these official trips in September and things like that. You got done with your senior year, and then January rolled around. You took visits each weekend, and then you had signing day, and everybody signed, and that was that. I didn't want to take a visit on National Signing Day, or I'm sorry, the weekend before National Signing Day. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to cloud my head with a visit that close to signing day. So the first visit I scheduled, and it's kind of a funny story. The first visit I scheduled was also the last weekend that I wanted to take a visit. And that was Florida State. And I remember Coach Sexton and Billy Sexton recruited me. He had the Tampa area. And Coach Sexton and I were talking about it. He said, look, whenever it is, I want your last visit. He said, I don't want you to go anywhere after Tallahassee. I want your last visit. So you tell me when that is and let's schedule it. I said, okay. I'm not going to take a visit the weekend before signing date, so let's do it. I think it was the last weekend in January. So I scheduled that one first, scheduled Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Florida also after I scheduled the Florida State visit. And then for my 5th visit, I needed to go somewhere midweek because there were only 4 weekends to go on visits in January. Tom O'Brien, not Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien's a different coach. Tom O'Brien was the offensive line coach at Virginia. Bill Walsh was the head coach. George Welsh.
Yes. they all run together after
Bill Walsh, George Welsh, same guy, right? So Welsh was the head coach at Virginia. Tom O'Brien was his offensive line coach. And he knew that I didn't want to take a trip that last weekend. And he said, how about this? We play North Carolina in basketball on this date. So why don't you come up? It was a Thursday night. He said, so why don't you come up Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday? I was like, North Carolina and Virginia basketball game and go to that? Sure. Yeah, I'm in. So that literally was the reason why I took a trip to Virginia. It was in, that final out of the final 5, there was 4 and then 3 or 4 others. And it was in that 3 or 4 other group. And that ended up being the reason I took that 5th trip. And that was actually, I went to, and I remember this, I flew out of Tampa the day after the Challenger blew up, which was on a Tuesday. I flew to Virginia on Wednesday. I was there Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. The basketball game was Wednesday night. Virginia knocked off North Carolina. North Carolina was number 1 in the country. So I got to see that in person, which was phenomenal. It was a great experience. I think I was leaving for the airport at 6:45. I got back to my hotel room at 5:45 in the morning. It was a long night after beating number 1 in basketball for Virginia people.
I'm sure they had places similar to the first in Charlottesville.
Right. So I got on the plane, flew back to Tampa, and then got in a car with my parents and drove up to Tallahassee for my FSU visit. So that was a good 6 days. Yeah, it really was. I was kind of exhausted at the end of that.
Yeah, I can only imagine back then. I used to be partake in some of those official visit weekends. They were fun.
Yeah, they were. And I still remember on my visit here, this was back before they eliminated boosters having contact with recruits. So they would have, and I'm sure Pat remembers the lunches in the president's box on Saturday during official visits. Dick Hauser was there. And so, here I am, I'm a baseball guy, and Dick Hauser's there. I ended up talking, and Jerry Cutts loves to tell this story. I ended up talking to Dick Hauser for like an hour and a half that afternoon. And I fiddled around. It wasn't a very good pitch, but I fiddled around with a knuckleball that I threw every now and then in high school. And Pat Tomberlin, who was a year before me, was a pitcher in high school as well. And he threw a knuckleball a lot. And Dick Hauser says, so here you are, another offensive lineman who's a pitcher. Next thing you're going to do is tell me that you're a knuckleballer. And I went, because he knew about Tomberlin. I went, well, I do throw a knuckleball. Jerry loves to tell that story, but I kind of knew that Florida State was where I wanted to go, which was why I was willing to schedule that one first and schedule that as my last visit and give, Coach Sexton give him that request. So I kind of knew before the visits that was where I wanted to go, but I didn't see anything on the visits that made me think that was the wrong choice. So yeah, it felt like the right place. You could see, you could see with that 85 class with Dion and Sammy and Eric Hayes and Odell and all of those guys, you could see the building blocks there. Even though the 85 season was a Gator Bowl season, you had Chip Ferguson, a true freshman who was the Gator Bowl MVP. You could just see that something big was going to happen at Florida State at that time, or at least I could, or at least I convinced myself that was the case. The guys felt like family when I was up here on a visit. I loved the coaching staff. And I'm not just saying this because Pat's on this, but the familial nature of the staff, their families, and how the families interacted with the players, all of that stuff just felt like it just felt like the right place to be. So that's how I ended up at FSU.
We had been a lot of places before we came to Florida State as a coach's kid, and there was no place like Florida State that we'd ever been before. And I remember one time, it was after I got done playing college football at Sanford and came back to finish my degree at Florida State. I remember, I can't remember who it was, but it was one of your teammates. They said, "Listen, you're part of this family, just like anybody else. You don't play here, but you're one of us." And it was very much like that.
I mean, I got to know Pat real well back in those days. We're still friends these days. I got to know John Gladden real well. I got to know John's sister really well. The McDuffie kids, everybody, the whole group seemed to have kids kind of in that same ballpark. And some of them were a little bit younger, but the Wednesday night dinners where the families of the staffs came to the Moore Center and had dinner with the coaches and with the team and everything else. And you just got to know everybody. And it was just a great atmosphere and a great time back in those days. There's so many wonderful memories from those days.
Now, I know you have not been to practice this spring yet, but obviously you followed the program closely. What are your general thoughts on what Mike Norvell's done in his 18 months on campus? I don't think it's been 18 months yet.
Yeah, it's not even. We're not quite to 18 yet. I think it's. I think that he's done a very good job under some extremely tough circumstances. I think running a program under what's gone on here, and this, whether it's football or baseball or basketball, whatever it is, I think running an athletic program with what's happened over the last 12 months is a remarkably difficult undertaking. I think running a university under what's happened over the last 12 months, running anything at this point with what's gone on over the last 12 months, I think is a difficult undertaking. I can't imagine, though, having just stepped into the job and having to do all of this and moving into a job like Florida State where you don't necessarily have the recruiting history to have those contacts throughout the state of Florida that you need to do that successfully. And have to then step into a situation and within the first couple of months, get the ability to go out and cultivate those things removed from you because they can't go out and recruit right now. They can't go out on the road, and he can't go out and meet high school coaches and do the handshaking and back patting and all of those things that I think need to be done. I think all of those things make it incredibly difficult. From a standpoint of what I've seen of him as a coach, I've been impressed. I think the attention to detail, I think, his ability to kind of organize and game plan and all the things that we saw of him at Memphis State, all of that stuff translates to what he needs to do at Florida State. The big question is whether he's going to be able to recruit at the level that you need to recruit at to have the kind of success that I think fans expect at FSU. That's we don't know the answer to that yet because we haven't been able to see him get out and do a lot of things that he needs to do. And he's behind guys at other places that already have those relationships. And I think that's unfortunate for him. I think you are starting to kind of see some success when you start looking at recruiting for next year. Those results, some of the players that he's been able to get verbal commitments from, I think have been pretty impressive. But he's going to have to do that at a consistent level year in and year out. And that's, not something that we know yet whether that's going to happen. And I do think that there's only so much you can do on the field without the talent level that you've got at other places. And I think that, we've all got to kind of temper our expectations a little bit. And I know that's hard to do once they get back out on the field for the first time. And spring practice doesn't lend itself to that. Spring practice lends itself to, oh my gosh, everything is great. We're going to be wonderful this year. And I think everybody kind of needs to slow down a little bit and let's see spring practice for what it is, a chance for these guys to go out and improve, to learn a little more about the system that this coaching staff is trying to put into place. And then, kind of temper the expectations a little bit, I think, for the fall. And we talked about it before we started this and understand what this team was last year as we go into 2021 and hope that we see incremental improvement. Because I don't think that this is going to be I don't think you go from what this team was last year to 10, 11, 12 wins in 2021. I just don't, I don't think you can make that jump. I don't think any coach makes that jump with what's going.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Bob and I were talking about that before you got on. That listen, I agree with you. I think what they've done in recruiting under some difficult circumstances has been impressive, particularly with the dead period and then a losing season. But certainly, this they got to take some steps before they get back to where people, where they're competing for the ACC. I don't think it's going to happen next year.
And I think he's done a good job of addressing some needs in the transfer portal. The transfer portal, I think it can be a good tool. It's certainly not something that you build a program with, but it can be something to fill some holes. And they've got some obvious holes that need to be filled. So I think they've done a good job of using the transfer portal for that. We'll see in the spring is a time for these guys to learn and to be taught technique and to be taught fundamentals and be taught the system. But I don't think you really learn much as fans. I don't think you can really learn a whole lot by watching the team against itself.
No, I agree with you 100%. We have a tendency in the spring not to see what's wrong with our favorite teams because we don't see them compete against each other. And we have a feeling, I think we have a tendency to make the glass half full when maybe it's not. I mean, you listen, spring is a time for optimism in life and in football as well. But certainly this team, as Bob and I have talked, and we've talked about on every podcast, they have a ways to go before they get back to where FSU fans expect them to be. Yeah. But certainly in the seem to be headed in the right direction based on everything we're seeing. I do have a question for you I have not asked, and it kind of makes me feel old when I sit down and talk about it. But you've got guys like Amari Gaynor, son of Herb Gaynor, on this squad. Decalon Brooks, his son's on this team. Then you've got legacies like Marvin Jones Jr. and Lamont Green Jr., who one of them's committed. Everyone expects Marvin Jr. to come to this sign with Florida State sometime between now and February. First of all, how old does it make you feel when you read?
The good news is I already got past that, and I got past that a long time ago. And I don't know if you guys remember when Maurice Crum Jr. played at Notre Dame.
Yes.
Because I played against Maurice Crum Sr. And Maurice Crum Jr. was probably 10 years ago now at Notre Dame, I want to say. Like 8, 10, 12 years ago. So I already got that out of my system. So now this doesn't bother me. And, we had a few years back a kid on the baseball team whose dad was one of my high school baseball and football teammates. So I've gotten all of that out of my system. I'm fine with it now.
And this may happen in other colleges, but I do think it's kind of neat where Florida State is as a program right now, and the fact that a kid like Marvin Jones Jr., Lamont Green Jr., and Aaron Hester have a chance to help Florida State reestablish itself as a dominant program. And it's, I'm always curious about Florida State football and recruiting, but certainly, the fact that I've got friends who now have sons that are being recruited by Florida State is kind of cool to watch. And it could be a neat story moving forward. To that end, how long before your son's recruited by Florida State?
My son has no interest in sports. He's the one. He goes to a baseball game with me and sits in the booth, and he's on his iPad the whole time and doesn't pay attention to the game at all. And I tried to tell him this morning about the end of that game last night and the infield fly rule, and it wasn't a forced play, but the catcher thought it was a forced play, and he's like, "Huh?" He had no idea what I was talking about. So no, he won't get recruited by anybody. He will go to school for something other than football.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
But he is a straight A student. So obviously he did not get the sport gene from me. He did not get the academic gene from me either.
Well, he probably got his last pair of Levi's from you, though.
Well, he does have the size, though. Yes, he's in 8th grade now. Last time he went to the doctor, I think he was just a shade under 6 feet tall, and
Woo.
Yeah, he's a big kid.
Well, maybe a late bloomer, so maybe golf. Maybe. Hey, by the way, the last time I saw you, well, I've seen you at baseball games, but the last time I saw you and hung out with you for an extended amount of time, I subjected you to my first golf outing in years. How is your golf game going? And I promise I can get the golf ball off the ground now.
I'm trying to think. I actually took him out and I played 9 holes and let him drive the cart. Well, I shouldn't say that I let him drive the cart. I let him ride the cart. I didn't let him drive. And I don't know, though, whether that was after the Osceola tournament or if that was before. But if I did play, it was just that 9 holes since then.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my golf game has not gotten much better, but I can get the ball off the ground. All right. I'm going to switch from football to basketball. Obviously, it'll be a priority for all FSU fans this weekend. They are a win against Michigan and then Alabama or UCLA for making it to the Final Four. What are your thoughts on the basketball team? How much you enjoying the tournament so far? And do you see Florida State? And Bob, this question's for you too. How far do you guys see these guys going? Got Michigan next.
I think it's pretty remarkable to lose what they lost off of the team last year. And I think everybody can agree that we're all still smarting a little bit from not getting to see that team last year, see the end of the season through, see where they would have gotten had things not gotten shut down. But to see that team lose what they lost and come back and have the kind of season that they've had this year, I think is remarkable. For me, Sweet 16, this is all gravy from here on out. I don't know that you could have reasonably predicted before the season started with those kind of losses that this team could be in the Sweet 16. And I don't think what's the Vegas line? I think I saw 3 was the last thing I saw for this game against Michigan. Michigan's a 1 seed and they're favored by 3 points. And to think that people are giving this ball club a legitimate shot to get to the Elite 8, I think says so much about Leonard Hamilton and about that staff and what they've been able to accomplish at Florida State. It's remarkable. And I'm happy that we seem to get a lot of talk about Coach Hamilton in the Hall of Fame here towards the end of the season because, really look at this guy's career when he got to FSU, this program was really bad. You're talking 6 and 7 wins bad. And, the kind of teams that I remember having a conversation with Bob Thomas years and years ago when he was with the Times Union. And I remember looking at him and saying one year, and I think it was the year before Leonard took over, and saying, is this team going to win a game in the ACC? And Bob's like, look, nobody goes 0-16 in the ACC. Well, Boston College did it a few years ago, but he said, they'll win something. And yeah, they would end up doing that. But we've gone from that point before Leonard took this program over to what was the stat I saw that there are only 3 teams in the country that have made the Sweet 16 the last 3 years, and Florida State's one of them. And think about going from a perennial doormat, a perennial play-in game in the ACC tournament every year, to where Florida State's one of the only 3 teams to have that kind of run to the Sweet 16. That's just remarkable.
Bob, what are your thoughts going in? I mean, I know that our basketball text group was Armageddon-like after the Notre Dame loss to end the season. It seems to be a little bit more positive place now. What are your thoughts on the Seminoles moving forward in the NCAA tournament?
It just seems like every time we start doubting what this team can do or what the program can do as a coaching staff, they just prove us all wrong. And I wrote about this a little bit earlier in the week. Preseason polls are always wrong. Florida State always over-delivers compared to what the ACC media picks them at. And the Seminoles have just found ways to win, not just with defense, but the scouting report has got to be impossible. As an opposing coach, to build a scouting report against these guys, because you're thinking, okay, well, we got to do something with Scotty Barnes, and MJ Walker's a leading scorer, and Raekwon Gray's really consistent, and Balsha Koprivisa's coming on late. And then all of a sudden, here's Anthony Polite, and he's just drilling.
Played out of his mind.
Yeah. Played the game of his life. How do you possibly prepare for every single thing coming? I think the honest answer is you can't. And that's what I think makes this run something we should appreciate. There's a lot of flaws. Like, we can always say, hey, this team should have won a regular season ACC title, should have won an ACC tournament title, should have done a lot of stuff. But in the end, did a lot of cool stuff along the way. And, might knock off Michigan, and we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, they looked dominant in the last game against Colorado. I mean, those guys never stood a chance. Listen, they played. Go ahead, Eric.
Especially the second half. I mean, that was just something to see. And you think about it too. They've gotten to the Sweet 16. What have they played? Maybe a half of what you would look at and go, they really played well, because they started off the Greensboro game strong, but I don't know that anybody would say that was their best basketball. So they've won 2 games. Against Colorado, the first half of that game, I don't know that anybody would say that was their best basketball too. Second half, they were outstanding. So to do that, coming off of performances like that, where that if you get MJ Walker back into the mix consistently on the offensive side of things, I think it's like Bob said, it's a tough matchup for no matter who they're going to end up playing. And I do think the fact that Michigan's only favored by 3 says a lot about what people think of Florida State.
Well, the Big Ten's reputation has taken a beating in this tournament, so maybe Michigan is not the giant killer we all think they are. But, I think this team's very hard to defend. The more you watch them, you're like, oh, God, I forgot he could play this well, and so forth and so on down the roster. But, I can't wait to see. I had them go in one of my brackets. I had them in the championship game. And they were played like one of the best teams in the nation in the middle of the season. Basketball is a streaky rhythm sport, and they seem to have found their rhythm back in the tournament. And I've got them beating Michigan. And, of course, I would probably have them beating everybody if I was watching it. But I do have them beating Michigan and beating Alabama in the Elite Eight. So that was definitely one of my brackets. All right.
Pat's got to go to the Final Four. You heard it.
I do. Hey, listen, I can show you my bracket.
There you go.
I can screenshot it to you. All right. So before we go, we did this with you in happy hour, but we like to have a little fun with you guys, the former players. We like to play, whether you want to call it word association or sentence association. I'm going to drop a name or a situation, and you come up with a word or sentence that comes to your mind.
Okay.
And we'll start. Bobby Bowden.
Folksy.
Okay. Wayne McDuffie.
Attention to detail.
Okay. Then just for you guys that don't know, Wayne McDuffie was Eric's offensive line coach at Florida State. Mike Martin Sr.
The best.
Okay. And then the guy that's almost as well known with Florida State baseball as Mike Martin Sr., Chip Baker. I know that you guys interact a lot.
Big shooter.
Okay. All right. Going back to your football days.
Comes to my mind when you say Chip Baker's big shooter.
Going back to your football days, the one guy that you did not want to have to line up against in boards.
Eric Hayes.
I can understand that.
I went. Gerald Nichols played a long time in the NFL. Played for the Jets. Played for the Bucks. I went against Gerald Nichols every single day my first year, playing on the scout team. He was an all-everything defensive lineman at the time, and I would rather go against Nick anytime than what Eric Hayes was in 1989. I mean, Eric Hayes. When we went out by the end of that season. We had a good offensive line. We had a very good offensive line. We didn't have anybody that could block Eric Hayes. And I still remember out at the Fiesta Bowl, the 1990 Fiesta Bowl, the practices for that. By that point in time, when we were doing one-on-one pass pro, Eric would beat whoever he was going up against. And then as he ran back to the other side of the ball, he'd heckle Coach McDuffie. You know, he'd make faces at him. He'd go, "Come on, Wayne, you ain't got nobody who can block me." And he would talk trash to Coach McDuffie, and Coach Mack ate it up. I mean, Coach Mack absolutely – he hated that his guys were getting abused, but he loved that kind of, that kind of back and forth, having that with Eric. But, yeah, didn't want to go against him.
What's your favorite game that you played in at Florida State?
89 Miami.
Okay.
1989 Miami.
Wasn't that the night game where Dexter put the flag on top of Bernard Clark's Tiger?
Yep.
That was. And listen, I got to know Bernard Clark. We both worked together at South Florida, and of course, when I heard that too, the defensive line coach, I was like, God, I got to work with Bernard Clark. Turned out to be one of the best guys I've ever met in my life.
Well, he and Eric Hayes were cousins, or are cousins. So I got to know him a little bit because I was real good friends with Eric. We were both from Tampa, both named Eric. We had a good connection there. So I got to know Bernard a little bit. And I was in a chicken wing eating contest with Bernard, Paul White, who was at Miami. It was Bernard, Paul White, Maurice Crum, and Mike Helt, who was from Tampa and played for Notre Dame. I was in a chicken wing eating contest with those guys, and it was right after the bowl games following the 89 season. And we're in between rounds of chicken wings, waiting on more chicken wings to come out. And the whole restaurant's full, and Bernard's kind of, he's yapping away. And I reached over and I grabbed a napkin and I threw it on top of his head. And Bernard just turns and, his eyes got real big, and he turned and looked at me and he goes, "That's right. You tell Dexter he can try on one of my national championship rings anytime he wants."
Yeah, he's a great. Listen, I worked with him for 2 years. What a great guy. He was known for his toughness as a football player, and obviously how hot summers are in Tampa. All right, so when I got to USF in football operations, Bernard used to go out and jog the track every day. So I was like, well, I'll jog with Bernard, and so it's 100 degrees. It's lunchtime because that was when Levitt would let us have lunch break, workout breaks was at lunch. And you remember those old kind of rubbery looking baseball sweat jackets baseball players used to wear, made by Wilson. They're made just to produce massive sweat. Well, right. We would stride the straightaways and walk the corners of the track. And it's unbelievably hot. And we would do this for 45 minutes, which you cannot tell now at all 15 years later. But Bernard would do that in that big, heavy sweat jacket on 100-degree days. And I was like, man, no wonder you were so tough as a football player. One of the most mentally tough people I've ever been around. Okay, it's Thursday night, which back when you and I were in school was the official kickoff of the weekend.
Right.
If we could go back in time 30 years, well, let's go 25. It sounds much better than 30. If we could go back in time 25 years, would we find you at the first, Ken's, or late night on a Thursday night?
Well, on a Thursday night?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my general answer to that would be the first. But on Thursday night, see, now you've got me thinking night-specific things. Because, every night, you had your places that you went every night. But I can't remember what Thursday night would have been. Tuesday was the first because of Bladder Bus, so we went there. We always hit the first for happy hour on Friday. We were at the first Friday night, Saturday afternoon.
Yes.
Spent a lot of time at the first. Wednesday
the first was never second.
Yeah, Wednesday night was Docks. Wednesday night was a Docks night. You can go up there and shoot hoops for beers on the.
Well, and Roosters was a thing for a while.
Roosters was the Monday night hangout.
That's right, Monday night.
Because they had Monday Night Football. We'd go to Roosters to watch Monday Night Football. I can't remember what Thursday. I think Clyde's was always a big night on Thursdays, but I don't know that I didn't go to Clyde's a whole lot. And late night was a big Thursday night spot as well. Yeah. But I mean, my general answer to that would be the first.
The last time I went to Roosters was the day of the 93 game against Notre Dame, and I refused to ever go back to that place again.
Why was that?
I just associated it with that loss.
I got you.
It was a crushing loss. I still remember
we lost, so you were taking that part out of the equation, huh?
Yeah. So my thing was, hey, I never watched a game at Roosters. I'll never do it again. So. Yeah. But Eric, hey, I know we took up a lot more time than you expected, but certainly want to thank you for joining us for Seminole Sidelines /Baselines today. We hope we can have you back and hope that our subscribers today, Osceola, enjoyed our hour with Eric and maybe a little bit more than that. But certainly I hope that you will join us again on Seminole Sidelines, sponsored by Alumni Hall. And if you're not an Osceola subscriber, please go to theosceola.com and you subscribe to the Osceola. Go to the discount subscription page, go to the discount code field and enter FSU20, FSU20 for a 20% discount off our annual subscription rate of $74.95. But Eric, thanks again for joining us. And we'll be back next week with another edition of Seminole Sidelines, sponsored by Alumni Hall.
I enjoyed it. Anytime.
This has been another edition of the Osceola's Seminole Sidelines. To subscribe to the Osceola, go to theosceola.com. Go Noles!